Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Well, we've got a municipal election coming up in the city of Toronto near the end of June. And I wanted to reach out to Anthony Furey, who is a candidate for mayor, and find out what he's all about. Why would he be one of 100 people that have got their names on the ballot, and what he thinks he can do to change the trajectory of the city of Toronto. Anthony Furey, welcome to the show, sir.
Hey, Brian, great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
My pleasure. So tell me, why are you running for mayor of Toronto?
Yeah, so I'd been a newspaper columnist for well over a decade with Post Media at the Toronto Sun, doing stuff with the National Post. Like yourself, sir, I was a talk radio show host doing Sirius XM and other channels. And you really get a sense of the city. You grapple with the issues, you know the game, you know the players. And then you hear from the folks as well, who are increasingly saying like the status quo is not working for them. They want to change in direction. I'm the father of three small kids. I got three boys, 5, 7, and 9. And it upsets me to hear what I've heard in recent months before we even knew there would be a mayoral election, that seniors don't like going to downtown Toronto anymore. They don't feel safe to go down for lunch or dinner to see a show. Young families are saying they don't feel it's affordable for them anymore. And they are concerned about the experience that, I've personally had of finding needles in the playground, not being able to enjoy the downtown like we used to. And Brian, now's kind of a time for choosing. We see those scenes in San Francisco and Seattle playing out, real urban decay going on in these cities, and we can't let Toronto go one step further in that direction. And I'm bringing forward that fresh voice, fresh perspective to be that person to say, we've got to act now, and we can fix this mess, but we got to act quickly to help improve this city we love.
Do you think you can win?
I do. I've had a great week of momentum, jumping ahead of people in the polls, and I'm privileged to have some great endorsements of both conservative and liberal politicians, and more volunteers joining by the day. So there's a month left, and I know that that's a lifetime in politics. So I'm real energized to get out there and just keep pounding the pavement.
You haven't been invited to some of the recent debates. How do you get into that top tier?
Well, I think I'm in the top tier when you look at the polling numbers that have come out. I'm on the major debates in June, the televised debates. I've been invited to those. So look, I was not in a couple debates. I was instead out at events and meeting people, and my numbers just kept improving. So maybe I should actually not attend those other debates coming up, because it seems to be working for me. I don't know, but I'll be in those. I'm looking forward to it.
It seems like there's some grouping on the left and the right, and that people are going to be taking away from or adding to the votes on the left and the right. And some people have said that you are going to take away votes from Mike Saunders because that's sort of in the same political spectrum that you are. Do you think that's a concern, a worry, or not?
Well, look, I didn't come here to speak ill of others. I respect Mr. Saunders was worn the badge for many years, although there is some argument to be made that he bears the responsibility for a lot of the law and order problems that we now face. But, Brian, to the point that you just made, I mean, I would say that we see that I have the momentum. Every week I'm stepping ahead of another person in the polls. Other people have plateaued. So I do think not too far from now, I think more the question is that Mr. Saunders will be taking votes away from me, and that'll be the conversation. Like I said, we got 4 more weeks to go here.
On the left, Olivia Chow seems to be leading in the polls and leading on the left. And some people think that some of the other people on the left need to step away such that she can get closer to 50%. What do you think is going to happen on the left of the political spectrum?
Yeah, you'll remember 10 years ago, Ms. Chow was #1 in the polls. And then on election day, she placed a kind of poor third showing behind Mr. Tory and Doug Ford. So I think what happens with Ms. Chow is when people get to know her a bit more, go and look at the policies, and they go, oh, yeah, this is not actually what I thought it was. So wherever she's at E-Day, I think it's going to be a lot less than it is right now in terms of polling.
Do you think John Tory was right to step down?
You know what? John Tory was quite popular in many circles, across the city, and he got elected 3 times. So I think that speaks to his popularity there. I'm proud to have a number of former John Tory supporters supporting me in this, because Mr. Tory is a well-liked guy, nice guy, but I think when it comes to making some tough decisions, people want to see a mayor who says, I'm going to do these things even if a small number of radicals say awful things about me, even if the headline of the Toronto Star comes out, calls me a mean name. And, you know, Brian, having done the talk radio thing for 10 years, I'm used to Twitter saying just horrendous things about me. But if what I'm doing is what the silent majority wants, and I know it's what's best for our families all across the city, that's what I'm going to do. Like saying parks are for families and we got to get rid of these encampments. We're compassionate people. You know, we want to treat the most vulnerable, but we just can't have tent encampments anymore. And that's the sort of thing where there's just a very small number of radicals are going to say horrendous things about you. But you got to buckle up and just be ready to persevere and do that. And I do think we've had some politicians recently at City Hall who can't take the heat, so don't make the tough decisions.
Some of your competitors really have the experience on City Council. You've got this experience as a political columnist for Post Media and Sirius XM Radio, and you've reported on issues on public safety, infrastructure, government accountability. How do you compare the difference between, someone that's actually been on council and has dealt with these issues versus you, who's been reporting on those issues?
Yeah, and Brian, whenever anybody says, oh, you haven't been on council for 10 years, I say, oh, stop bragging about me. Stop pitching my selling points. I know, I'm flattered, because I think right now a lot of people go, okay, you guys were on council for 4 years, 8 years, 12 years, what have you, and you played a role in creating this mess where we feel like Toronto is moving more towards San Francisco or Seattle, where we look at the budget, it's ballooned by 50% in the past 10 years, and yet people feel not that they're getting 50% more service, but that they're getting less service. So I would say that it's time for a fresh voice, a fresh perspective. But to your point, having been that newspaper columnist, radio show host, I know the game, I know the players, I've been exploring the issues for years. I'm kind of a hybrid insider outsider. I mean, I'm going to be able to get along with council just fine. And these are files that I'm happy to go the distance on in terms of my knowledge of them, to get in and manage City Hall for the betterment of everyone.
We're chatting tonight with Anthony Furey, who is a candidate for mayor in the upcoming City of Toronto election. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes with Anthony. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We've got a municipal election for mayor, a by-election coming up the end of June in the City of Toronto, and Anthony Furey is my guest tonight. He is a candidate for that mayor. He's got an interesting background where he, for 15 years, has been a columnist with Post Media, Sirius XM, etc., and also a podcaster, which is kind of interesting. I don't know whether that's relevant at all to anything, but it is a way that you get to know a lot of the issues, meet a lot of the people. I've found that myself. And he's now running for mayor, and he's up against a whole slew of something like 100 people, including a dog that's got their name on the ballot. Which is very different than the last election, where there were only a few people that put their name forward. So it's going to be an incredibly competitive race. One of the issues I think that we'll talk about, Anthony, is it's going to be difficult for anyone to get above 50%. And so what kind of a mandate do they get if they win with 20 or 30 or whatever percent? And that, I think, is an issue. But let's talk about some of the issues and what you would do. You mentioned public safety. Tell me a little bit about what you think the issue is and what you would do.
Yeah, Brian, one thing I came out of the gate on strong from day one is that I am going to phase out the drug injection sites throughout Toronto and replace them with treatment centers, because a compassionate society doesn't keep people on drugs. It helps them get off of drugs. And by doing that, we make our families safer. We make our streets and public transit safer. Why? Because whenever there's news of a random attack on public transit, on our streets, they don't really tell you what was going on in the news story. But then a couple of days later, a police officer I know or someone in the health system sends me a text message and says, well, drugs, the person was troubled on drugs. That's what brought them to the point where they did that attack. And this is what's going on throughout Toronto. The city of Toronto knows this, and yet public health is trying to create more drug injection sites, both places just called injection sites and also these sort of underground sites where they are pushing all shelters and not-for-profit shelters too, not just city-run shelters, to become quasi-injection sites. Homeless shelters are being turned into injection sites. Willowdale Manor is a seniors complex in North York, and they're planning to put a place on the green space where seniors were previously doing Tai Chi and so forth, which will become a place where chronically troubled homeless men, that's their terms, not mine, from the city, are doing harm reduction, as they call it. Drug dealers are pretty smart people. They know how to get to their clientele. So we're going to take this previously peaceful senior center and basically turn it into a drug haven. Everybody I speak to, doesn't matter where they are in the political spectrum, all religions, Etobicoke, North York, Scarborough, they see this creeping into their neighborhoods. They don't like it. Now is a time for choosing. And I'm the only choice out there who says, we got to turn this all around. We're a compassionate society. We're going to care for these people, but we can't let this decay continue. And that, Brian, I believe, is one of the single most reasons why we're having this increasing fray, this decay going on our transit and downtown.
So the argument for safe injection sites would be that people are going to use these drugs anyway. They're hooked on them. They're addicted to them. They're going to use them, and that it would be better for people to be using safe, healthy, sanitized vehicles to inject themselves rather than what they can get on the street. And you would argue that, no, that's not true.
Well, I would argue that if you go into a hospital and you're a cigarette smoker, there's literature everywhere naming and shaming you for that. They're really aggressively pushing you. You sit down, your doctor says, we're getting you off of cigarettes right away, even though it's a very difficult thing to quit cigarettes. And many millions of people in recent decades have done it. Hats off to them. When we're dealing with people in a drug crisis, the current, I would say, agenda of the system is not even to mention treatment. And they don't. It's quite a scandal, Brian, what's going on in terms of people who present when they have an overdose. And there's no discussion of, hey, we know this is difficult, but we got to connect you with this person right now, this counselor, now's your moment of need. Their headspace is not in that direction. They're always coming up with excuses to not offer counseling and treatment. And it's all there in the paper trail and the literature, some of the whistleblowers I talk to in the system. So this is all about pivoting the way we approach this.
So you think that the current safe injection sites have no interest in treatment? All they're interested in doing is providing those injections.
Yeah, that's pretty much a fact when you actually look at on the ground how things operate. I'm sure the workers will say they'd love to have people get off the drugs, but their headspace is not in that direction. Another example, the City of Toronto has an app that it gives to drug users to use while they are using. And there's no module on that app, no button to press or nothing in the FAQ that says, are you interested in treatment? Here's some resources. So that's unfortunate. We have seen things, the NDP Premier of BC, David Eby, has talked about bringing in involuntary treatment, where if someone presents for 3 times in a row, having had an overdose, we say, look, this isn't working for anyone. You're going into treatment. New York City Mayor Eric Adams doing stuff. Portugal decriminalizes all drugs. But when people highlight that, what they also don't highlight is they also put people into mandatory treatment. They don't lock them up for doing drugs or having possession of drugs, but they do say, you got to go to treatment now. We are just not in that headspace, and we've got to do it if we want to avert becoming more like Seattle, San Francisco, Vancouver downtown.
We have a fentanyl crisis in the world, but certainly in North America and in Toronto. What would you do about that?
Yeah, we want to work with Toronto Police Service. We want to work with the RCMP to be all hands on deck when it comes to those shipments that are coming across the border, stuff showing up on the Port of Vancouver, which when mayor circles get together and talk about how we can work on that, I'd love to speak with the mayor of Vancouver. I'd love to speak with the public safety minister about it all, because I think people, to your point, you said it right, fentanyl crisis, we all know, and I want to get on the same page to disrupt those channels for sure.
Was decriminalization of marijuana a right decision?
I think it was, but I think that we still want to have a culture where we are discouraging abuse of these issues. And right now, we are not there when it comes to these harder drugs. I'm very concerned that the City of Toronto, right now, there is no mayoral supervision. There's no adult supervision at City Hall. And the head of Toronto Public Health, she's been freestyling, and she wrote a letter to the federal government saying, we now want to decriminalize hard drugs for minors even. And here's the thing, police are already saying, well, okay, well, dealers are smart people. That means they're going to just have the 14-year-olds act as the drug mules because they can't even be stopped by the police. So we really got to reflect on the unintended consequences of all of this. I'm very concerned about it.
There has been some musing by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and others about decriminalizing additional drugs. Would you recommend that? And what would that do to the City of Toronto?
I would not. We're not there yet. I mean, if we had greater treatment aspects going on, pushing in that direction, then we can talk about it. But right now, it just becomes a free-for-all. It continues urban decay. Brian, I also want to mention that I have announced that as mayor, I will hire 500 more police officers. And that sounds like a lot, but all that will actually do is bring Toronto back to the head count it was at in 2014. We are suffering from a classic case of cause and effect. We got rid of hundreds of officers, so now response times are down. They are just not able to deal with the volume of calls and issues. And I think the bad guys also know if they're not going to face repercussions for minor infractions, they're probably not going to face them for major infractions either. I mean, people who are regularly calling 911 because they work in, shelter systems, or they work with vulnerable persons prone to violence. People who are calling 911 on a regular basis, they say like the phone just doesn't get picked up anymore. People just don't, like knife fight calls. They don't respond to that anymore. And I don't fault the police for it. They're just dealing with the limited resources they have.
So former mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani, was sort of the big proponent of the broken windows theory and said that you had to make sure that you addressed those minor issues. Otherwise, they would morph into bigger issues. Are you a proponent of the broken windows theory?
100%, Brian. And that is what we are experiencing right now all throughout Toronto. So the subway is full of litter. People use it as a homeless shelter. And pardon my language, it smells like piss. And those are reasons why a lot of people don't like using public transit anymore. People say, oh, we're like New York in the 80s. We're not. I mean, there's crazy stuff going on statistically there, but we're going in that direction, which is why we really have to act now. I've also said we need more visible police presence and community patrol. The Jewish neighborhood in Toronto, they're having to pay for private security because the idea of the beat cop doesn't exist anymore. So there's a lot of people who are doing graffiti or even throwing bricks at synagogues facing zero consequences. And, if you can get away with that, you're maybe going to think I can get away with something even worse. And I don't even want to mention those possibilities. So we have to bring policing back for the major and minor infractions. I think you've nailed it with broken windows theory.
3 years ago this week, George Floyd was killed in the United States and led to a huge amount of protest around North America, around the world, certainly in the United States, but also in Toronto, and for calls for defunding the police, people going the opposite direction of what you're recommending. Do you think we should be defunding the police? And what do you think about racism within the police force?
We absolutely should not be defunding the police. It was wrong to have done it to the degree that we did. And I am proud to say I'm the only major candidate running for mayor who didn't at some point throw the police under the bus the past few years. And I got to tell you, as a commentator, I was on, CBC National Live and on these other stations, and they're really pushing you to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, that was a time when you were really called upon to denounce everyone and everyone as horrible names. And I did not do that. What I will tell you is the people who want the bad apples dealt with the most are the police force themselves, because when they see those videos of those horrendous things happening, they say bad protocol, bad training, bad cop, probably racist cop, and that really upsets them. But I know when people don't like when we import US culture wars to Canada, and I think we suffered from a little bit of that a few years ago. Some horrible stuff we saw in some of those videos in the US, and we should be thankful actually that we don't have some of the same challenges that those cities do.
Is there anti-Black racism in the Toronto Police Force, or do you don't think it exists here in Canada?
Yeah, I'm sure there is. Absolutely. I've heard from, obviously, when, I've been carded twice in my life, obviously when I was much younger. And then, Black gentlemen I speak with, or, friends of mine say, well, you've been carded twice, Furey. I've been carded 32 times kind of thing. There's obviously a discrapancy going on there in that situation. But our problem was we threw the baby out with the bathwater in all of that. And police officers themselves will talk about the racism that they've seen. But I don't think that means you throw the whole system under the bus.
Violence on the TTC has become a big concern of late. What would you do there?
We need to increase the visible police presence, not just on our streets, but on public transit, both having more police officers available for transit and TTC special constables. Brian, there are times when there are only 12 officers on shift for the entire TTC system. So it's like, well, if you're going to get stabbed in the east end of Toronto, try not to do it when those few officers we have are on the west end of Toronto, because it's going to take 2 hours for them to get to you. I mean, it's crazy that that's the calculus that you got to think about. So it really is a volume game. It's a numbers game.
So safe injection sites, drugs, number of police, and special constables. Anything else that you would do from a public safety standpoint?
I think that visible police presence ramping up is so key. The TTC Special Constable Union did tell me that they would like the ability to be equipped with tasers. I think that's a good idea. And then I would work with Premier Ford to change the provincial provisions of that, because they're currently barred from doing that. So there are a number of smaller sort of managerial points where you can do this. Also, the TTC police report directly to TTC management, which is a little odd because, as you know, the Toronto police don't report to the mayor, they report to the police chief. So we do have to change some structural things to improve those safety issues. And like we said about the broken windows, you got to clean the streetcars. People don't want to go on the streetcars, on the subway cars if they're dirty.
You mentioned second, respect for the taxpayers on your front page of your website. Tell me how you would respect taxpayers in a different way.
Well, first of all, I am not going to bring in any new taxes at all. The people running against me, they're talking about road tolls. All the city councilors running for mayor, Brian, they voted in studies to proceed with a municipal sales tax. And I don't think people know that enough. It's quite something. We got the federal, we got the provincial. Now they want to bring in a whole new tax. Not on my watch, not during an affordability crisis. It'll just jack up the price of goods for regular folks, for low income folks, and it'll be a disincentive for investment all throughout the city. When it comes to road tolls, you know, they want to, when someone from Mississauga or Brampton or Oshawa comes to Toronto, I don't view them as like a climate criminal who needs to be penalized. I view them as someone who's coming here to support our business or to see a Jays game, and we'll take your money for seeing the game or for having lunch or dinner, or, you know, paying for your parking and stuff. So I don't want to disincentivize that. We paid for these highways decades ago with our tax dollars. We don't need to pay for them again. We got to go in and approach the books with a pro-business mindset. You know, Brian, all these business terms that, you know, you would know far better than I do, whether it's, you know, zero-based budgeting or Lean Six Sigma or throwing all the other terms, they're not doing that at City Hall, and they've never heard about any of those things at City Hall. So all the business persons I'm speaking to, they say they just want to see a more pro-business mindset brought to managing the budget. I plan to do just that.
John Tory was a right of center mayor and politician, you know, thought of as a business person working with Rogers and other places. Didn't he not bring a pro-business orientation, a zero-based budgeting kind of orientation to City Hall?
Yeah, I don't think that exercise had been done in more recent years. So just taking a full-on audit of the books and a full program review, I think it was initially done, which is great. What I would do in the mayor's office right away is we would do a full program review, take a look at everything that's going on. And I don't mean you're going to pay KPMG $2 million to find you $1.5 million in savings kind of thing. I don't mean, oh, this chair costs 10 grand. You know, that's not right. Although obviously if there's a chair that costs 10 grand, we got a problem. I'm going to deal with that. I more mean we're going to ask, like, why, look at all the things the city's doing and ask, is this what residents expect their tax dollars to go to? Is this a core service? Because I will tell you, clearing the bike lanes in January and February for a ticket cost of $10 million when no one's riding them in January and February, is that a priority? People are telling me public safety is a priority. Clearly not the bike lanes. We are giving Toronto School Board students $1,000 grants to bring in Greenpeace to run activist events in their classroom. Sorry, what? We're going to raise your taxes for that? So we're going to get those sorts of things just off the books. I mean, how did this mission creep get in?
Property taxes in Toronto, based on market value, sort of the mill rate, are half of what they are in Hamilton. 60% of what they are in Mississauga. The whole GTA, the Greater Toronto Area, has property taxes that are substantially higher than the City of Toronto. Some people think because politicians in Toronto haven't had the guts to tell Toronto taxpayers that property taxes should and must go up. But sounds like you're saying you don't think property taxes should go up.
I don't. What I'd rather do is build more development up and out, and every new condo on the market represents an extra $3 grand in revenue coming in. That's how we're going to grow the pot. Also, I want to grow the economy more generally. Brian, we can't share the wealth if we don't grow the wealth. One thing that Mr. Tory did in his last budget was he put graphs showing that, yes, you made a point of that one metric about property tax, but by other metrics, Toronto is right in the middle in terms of property tax throughout Canada. So I don't entirely buy the argument that our property tax is too low, because look, if you're a nurse, a school teacher, wherever you work, your salary is more or less the same, whether you live in Toronto or Mississauga or Brampton or whatnot. So I don't think someone should be paying extraordinarily higher raw property tax figure just based on what side of steels that they live on.
Well, that's interesting. So effectively what you're doing is you're arguing the property taxes shouldn't be based on market value. They should be based on size of lot or number of homes, which are some of those metrics that you're quite correct, suggest that property taxes aren't too high. But because the market value of homes in Toronto are higher, and we do base property taxes on market value assessment, that the property taxes in Toronto are dramatically lower than all of the surrounding cities and suburbia. So do you think we're using the wrong metric then?
Yeah, I would say so. I just think it's a conversation that I'm not too bothered by. I think the rate is pretty much fine, and I think it's about what value you're getting for your service. Like I said, the budget's ballooned by 50% in the past decade, and yet the potholes aren't getting filled, and we have a public safety concern. So we actually have a lot more revenue coming in. How are we managing that revenue? To me, it really does just seem like a spending question.
You talked about one of the solutions being to grow the size of the city and density. Development charges were increased last year by the City of Toronto by 47%. Do you support 47% increases in development charges?
I do not at all, because those are all passed on by the consumer. If we're told that a number one issue is affordability, and that's what I'm hearing at the door, and it's all passed on to the end user. So I'm hearing it from the CEOs of the top development companies, and I'm hearing it from realtors on the ground and from home buyers. They're all frustrated by it. As you know, the development fees make up a lot. Also, planning time makes up a lot of time, because if you're getting bridge financing or what have you, time is money. You're just passing that on onto the final cost there to the home buyer, and it filters down to the renter as well when they're working on capital improvements. So there are some other people running against me who claim they're sort of pro growth and pro affordability, but they don't like getting rid of those fees because they just want to hoard over that revenue. They want that money in their sort of city hall purse. And I'm saying, if we want to lower the cost for people, this is one of the primary ways of doing it. Like you said, look at the percentage count on it.
Maybe we can turn to affordability, but let's do it after a break. So we're going to be 2 minutes away at some messages, and then we'll be back with Anthony Furey talking about the affordability crisis in the City of Toronto. Stay with us, everybody.
Yeah.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga Night 60. We've got a City of Toronto by-election for mayor coming up at the end of June, and my guest tonight is Anthony Furey, who is a candidate for mayor. He's got really quite an impressive background as a columnist with Post Media, with SiriusXM, with his own podcast, etc., where he was focusing on commentating, being a journalist and being a commentator on municipal issues as well as other things, and talks about public safety, respect for taxpayers, economic growth, etc. Anthony, we were just chatting before the break about housing affordability. Some people think that it's a crisis now in Toronto, the Greater Toronto Area. The Premier of Ontario has put in place numerous different issues. Bill 23, Bill 100 or 101 or whatever it was, that changed dramatically the way that we review and approve housing, trying to shorten the time period, trying to exclude people from being able to oppose it, and reduce the development fees, and really trying to force different municipalities to agree a certain amount of housing needs to get built every year. And he's targeting 1.5 million homes over the course of the next 10 years, incremental, to be built in the Greater Toronto Area. Tell me, what do you think needs to be done? What would you do as mayor to address the housing affordability crisis?
I think we ultimately suffer from a classic supply and demand issue. And we saw it in COVID, where the rents actually dropped dramatically for units that went on the market during COVID. So clear sign that it is classic supply and demand economics at play. I think right now it's a great thing that there's so many people around the world who say, Toronto is a place I want to be. Canada is a place I want to be. That's obviously putting pressure on us in terms of a numbers game. Mr. Trudeau has his targets for about 500,000 people coming to Canada a year. A lot of them want to come to the great GTA, understandably. So we're trying to manage all of that. So we do need to ramp up supply. I will be an ally of Premier Ford's when it comes to all these measures he's brought in. And then from the City Hall level, I have said that if a project isn't approved within 6 months, then it's auto approved. still has to follow the rules and regulations, but we just can't drag our feet on this anymore. It's holding things back, and time is money, so it's adding to the costs of things. And I do think I'd like to speak with Mr. Trudeau about ways that we can sort of manage that intake in a way that doesn't put more infrastructure pressure on Toronto, because you hear from people all across the city, particularly recent immigrants, who say, I didn't realize that I wouldn't be as well served by infrastructure as I thought, or I didn't realize how difficult it would be for me to pay the rent. Quebec has a bit of a special treatment with the federal government in terms of talking about those numbers. I think Toronto should be in a similar scenario.
So you'd like to restrict immigration?
I think I'd just like to speak with the federal government about ways that the targets Mr. Trudeau has set can be, diversified across the country in a way that doesn't set those extreme infrastructure pressures, or we just need a greater commitment from the feds to fund all of that infrastructure, because it's a great thing that people want to come live in Toronto. It speaks to the fact that, hey, we're down, but we're not out. We're still a great city.
So average house prices in Canada versus the United States, or in Toronto versus comparable cities in the United States, are twice the personal disposable income than they are in the United States. In other words, we pay twice as much of our personal disposable income on average for housing as Americans do. What's caused that?
I think it's primarily the supply and demand issues that are going on in this city, combined with, as you said, the development charges and the slow growth there. I'm really looking forward to regional transit getting better built, so people all across the GTHA can be better served. I know going to New York or having family in London, England, people are just able to get around a lot more and make choices about where they live that are more affordable for them, but they can still get to work and pay those bills rather than be stuck on the Gardner all day or stuck on the DVP all day.
So if supply is the problem, whose fault is that? Is that developers not building, or is it government restricting the building?
Developers, they want to build. I mean, they want to take out those loans. They want to get the land. A lot of times they have the land. They're going to go, capital allocation, I think, tells you where to go. So they're responding to the market. I think primarily it's how government's responding to all of this right now. And that's why I said all the points you've made about development charges and timeline, that's key.
So, Anthony, let me ask you a question. I agree with you. I think that governments, particularly municipal governments, have been the problem in this regard. Some people, CMHC came out and said that 5-10% of our housing price problems were caused by foreign investment, and we've seemed to have had a lot of activity to restrict that. And they think that a similar amount is caused because of historically low interest rates. But they said the vast majority of our current housing affordability crisis has been caused by municipal regulation that's restricted supply. So municipal government particularly, has been the problem. A lot of your competitors have been on municipal government, so they've been part of the problem and haven't changed it. How can people that have been part of the problem think they're going to be part of the solution?
Well, exactly, which is why I'm proud to be winning people's support on that very issue. And there are a couple of city councilors running against me who were heads of different housing committees, and I don't think they've really made the situation any better for those very reasons. They haven't been able to get her done. They haven't been able to expedite these projects. We got to be all hands on deck. And Brian, one thing I haven't done is done that press conference where I say, as mayor, I'm going to build 50,000 units. Well, no, I'm going to build 70,000. And they're all sort of tripping over each other. I go, what are you guys talking about? First of all, you're not building anything. It's the private sector that's building it. So you want to empower them. Second of all, some of them are actually talking about the government building units. It's like, whoa, pause, time out. If you really want to screw up this problem, bring more government into the housing affordability mix. And then I think we're really going to see things slow down, and we're going to see prices go up even further.
So Toronto has one of the longest review processes for zoning, building applications, et cetera, in the world, in North America, based on statistics. What would you do? You said that after a certain length of time, you just approve them?
Yeah, 6 months or it's approved. Then you still have to follow the rules and regulations, because one developer told me an anecdote about how they had a heritage wall at the front of their property that, you got to keep this heritage wall and you can't tear down these bricks. Sometimes you see weird buildings where it's like it's all glass, but then there's like one weird brick wall that's kept because, I don't know, back in 1890, somebody baked a nice piece of bread in front of it, and therefore it's like a, you know, heritage symbol. I don't know. And those meetings about, and this person, the developer, they had meetings pushed back for months just over talking about this one heritage wall. And I'm like, guys, like, just for either get the meeting done, just show up the next day, do the meeting and deal with it, or you're auto approved and whatever. We'll figure out what we're doing with this wall moving forward. So I think there's a lot of foot dragging. I mean, the planning department, no disrespect, they're paper pushers. They got to push the paper. They're not doing it right now.
Science Center, Ontario Science Center, Ontario Place. The province of Ontario have suggested putting a big spa at Ontario Place and also moving the Ontario Science Center down there. What do you think of those two recommendations?
I got to tell you, Brian, I'm shocked at the passions that this issue is brought up by people. And it's not clean along political lines. It's not like these people think this way, those think that way. So I do think whatever the final proposal is from Premier Ford, before I would approve it, because the City Hall, the mayor's office has approval authority on it, I would want to see a bit more robust consultation so people can have their say on the final project. I mean, the thing's been consulted to death, but, you know, what are you guys going to do? Okay, we'll let the folks have their say. I do think the premier's talked about something for everyone, and I think that's a good thing in terms of just flooding it with options. I mean, when you actually go down there and walk around there, it's pretty derelict. I think they film like science fiction movie scenes sometimes there every now and then because it's a pretty underperforming space. There's some dystopian components to it. I did say when it comes to building the new Subway Ontario line, we can trudge out some of the landfill from there, and instead of paying to put it at the Leslie Street spit, we can take it, dump it at Ontario Place to add acreage, because that actually happened in the 70s. That's how Ontario Place is the size it is. It's infill that's filling it, and we're doing that with Finch West LRT line. We're taking that landfill and putting it in other places to expand. So get some more acreage. So you want green space? We got more green space. You want playgrounds? We'll give you more playgrounds. And then you want like a Great Wolf Lodge type thing, which is what this spa is. Well, we'll have that too.
You talk about transit. Eglinton Crosstown is still not open and operating, and no one knows when it will be. What's gone wrong there? What would you do as mayor?
Yeah, so I came out at a press conference about a month ago, and I said, as mayor, if the Eglinton Crosstown is not open for service, and it won't be when I get in, we are going to sue Metrolinx for breach of contract and damages to the tune of $1 billion and redistribute those funds in part to the affected businesses along Eglinton. City Hall has failed to lead on this issue, Brian. We are told of delays, cost overruns, and serious structural problems. And every 6 months we get this news, we go, oh, okay. Oh, that's too bad. All right, talk next year. No, people are livid, and we got to start speaking up and taking a stand for us. All the parties to this are suing each other. Anyway, the city's got to get in the game to say we're not going to tolerate this anymore. And we got the other line starting, the Ontario line. And I want to set the standard that, look, we need more subway lines. It's great. I'm looking forward to partnering with the premier on this, but you can't do the same thing on these new lines that you did at Eglinton. It's just not acceptable.
Some of your competitors are talking about uploading the DVP and the Gardner, which are City of Toronto assets, and we're spending, I think it's $500 million fixing them up. What would you do with those two assets?
Well, I think that those are non-starters about saying, I'm not campaigning on here's what Mr. Ford will do, here's what Mr. Trudeau will do, because I can't make those promises. So I think those are weird pledges. Also think tearing down the Gardner is crazy talk, which some of my competitors are doing. Look, I think, and I don't want to be the mayor that thinks their whole job is just to shake down other levels of government for money. But at the same time, Toronto's, a leading economic engine of the city. So when we see people who say, you know what, I'm checking out, I'm going to Florida, I'm going to Texas, or, I just can't be bothered to, to do the rat race anymore, I'm going up to Collingwood. I mean, think of the money we're losing, think of the jobs and opportunity. So I would like to speak with other levels of government from that perspective and go like, come on, guys. We want to keep sending you federal tax dollars in terms of all these jobs we're attracting to downtown. So just help me out a little on all of this, because people, I was meeting with a hotel association summit a couple of weeks ago, and they get obviously tourists and they get business travelers. And increasingly, folks are saying, apparently, oh, Toronto's kind of not what I thought it was. Like, it's a little less attractive to be a tourist at because the city's kind of looking a bit crummier. And business folks say, wow, this would be hard for my employees to rent. And you can't drive anywhere. So that's the feedback. If you're going to open a branch plant here, you're going to rent a few more floors at First Canadian Place for your business. I think they're just a little less enthusiastic about it. And that's a problem. So we got to speak with the Prime Minister and say, hey, like this is going to be cash for all of us to grow the economy. We got to deal with these concerns.
So Ontario and Toronto, for the first time in a long time, had out-migration last year, where people were moving to Quebec and other places. Some people think just because of affordability, but is this a vote of lack of confidence in Toronto?
It absolutely is. As the father of three small kids, someone who grew up in this city, I love this city. It really concerns me, and I feel like this is a city worth fighting for, and we got to fix this.
We're going to take a break and come back with some concluding comments in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Anthony Furey, who is running for mayor of the city of Toronto in the election that's coming up by the end of June. And we got 1 month left until that election. It's a by-election, and there's something like 100 people, including a dog, that's running for mayor. And Anthony wants to be the person that is everyone's top choice in that election. Anthony, I wonder if you could step back for a second and tell me what your vision for Toronto is. Some people think that Toronto is going to be the third largest metropolitan area in all of North America within 5 or 10 years. And that I've heard from a couple of planners that we're not thinking about that vision. We're not thinking about, being larger than Dallas, Houston, Chicago, et cetera, that we're still thinking about, little Toronto the good. What's your vision for the city of Toronto in the next 10 years?
My vision is to make this city a clean, safer, more affordable city so that we can continue to make this a city where families feel like they have a future, where businesses want to invest and grow the economy, because we can't share the wealth if we don't first build the wealth. And right now, there are so many indicators that say, yes, to your point, we are growing in many respects, but we're also declining in a number of others. We spoke about the broken windows theory. We spoke about how so many people are saying, we can't let Toronto look one step more like Seattle, like San Francisco, Vancouver, all the chaos we're seeing on those streets. We can't be New York in the 80s. We are not there yet, but we have to act now to prevent it. So I'm going to hire 500 more police officers, which only brings us back to where we were 10 years ago. I'm going to phase out the drug injection sites, replace them with treatment centers. I'm also going to deal with these bike lanes. They're really stressing people out here. I like cycling myself, but it's got to be on non-major roads. It's really contributing to clogging the streets. And we got to say no new taxes. We got to grow the economy through growth, as opposed to shaking down people for more money who are already hit with affordability issues. As the father of three small kids, I love this city. I'm committed to it for the long haul, but we have some problems and we can fix this together.
So I'm a business guy, and I completely agree with your comments in regards to the lack of supply and the fact that it's government that's caused the problem in that regard. I do think that we need a open for business or an economic growth agenda, which I don't think we've had to the extent we need. And so I agree with those. I also agree with your comments in regards to public safety, because I do think that if we don't feel safe, we're not going to be downtown. We're not going to be going to the Jays games that you mentioned and other things. We're not going to be going on the TTC when it's not well trafficked and well used, because we're not feeling safe. So I think that those are issues. That said, I do think that we've had a huge amount of attention on expenses, and I think that we've got a revenue problem, not just an expense problem, and that's caused by the property taxes that are half of what they were. And I really worry that we haven't had strong enough mayors that like you might be, that can have that conversation with people and tell them that they're paying half of what they would if they were north of Steeles or on the other side of the Etobicoke Creek. And if you don't pay your fair share in taxes, that's an issue. And I guess finally, I think it's absurd to spend $500 million building highways that only add something like reduce the commute by something like 2 minutes for the average commuter. And so I do think that that's a expense problem in that regard. How would you speak to someone like me?
Well, I first of all, I'd speak to someone like you, so I appreciate the feedback. I want to get the feedback from everyone. And I think, look, to your point about the property tax, I mean, I've said we're going to do the program review. We're going to do the audit, look through the books before we even begin to talk about tax increases. So notice I have not said 0% property tax increase, because I think that's just irresponsible. And that's one of those, crazy marquee promises that just isn't real. So I don't know what the property tax increase is going to be. But I think you owe it to the folks. I owe it to the folks to go and look at the books before we talk about that, because there are the efficiencies, there are the overhauls that we can do, and you front end it with that, and then you go and talk about other aspects. So I definitely want to make that happen. And to our point about there are things that are more in the federal catchment that I hope the federal government will join us for. Brian, the shelter system in Toronto is about 40% capacity refugees. That's obviously not being well managed, that intake. Mr. Trudeau did recently close that Roxham Road crossing. That some of those people are in the Toronto shelter system. So that's a federal spend. So when we have a budget deficit, we're looking at about $150 million. That really is a federal expense on our books. So there's a number of items like that to narrow the gap.
Anthony Furey, if people want to check you out, to potentially donate to you and hopefully vote for you, how do they check you out?
They go to www.furey.ca. That's FUREY.ca. Thanks so much for the opportunity, Brian. Great conversation.
Anthony Furey, thank you so much for joining us and letting us know what your policies are, what your background is, how you would change Toronto, and good luck. Thank
you, Brian. All the best.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thanks for joining us. And remember, whoever you're going to vote for, whether it's Anthony or somebody else, this is going to be a really important election for the city of Toronto and frankly, for the whole GTHA, I think. And so therefore, paying attention to the candidates and their policies and getting out to vote is critical. So please do that. Good night, everybody.